Chuck Norris found himself at the center of one of the most astonishing and hilarious restaurant showdowns ever recorded. Something truly amazing happened that evening, something so over the top and surreal, it left every witness speechless. The commotion involved an influencer determined to humiliate an unassuming diner, completely unaware that the man in denim she targeted was none other than a living legend. The entire scene would become one of the greatest viral moments in the city's recent memory, and absolutely nobody could have predicted how it would unfold. Late one evening, an upscale restaurant known as the Gilded Fork prepared for another night of pampering its wealthy patrons. Located in the heart of Dallas, this establishment prided itself on hosting the elite and featured interior accents that screamed opulence. The staff had grown accustomed to guests sporting designer shoes, glittering jewels, and an overabundance of self-importance. Yet on this particular night, an undercurrent of quiet tension would soon erupt into the kind of spectacle that waiters tell each other about for years to come. In a modest corner booth of this sumptuous setting, Chuck Norris enjoyed his dinner with characteristic calm. Wearing a simple denim shirt and matching jeans, he appeared as though he had just come from a leisurely day outdoors. Nothing about his demeanor suggested that he was one of the most recognized names in action film history. He showed zero interest in drawing attention, keeping to himself while occasionally leafing through a small book of motivational quotes. Most of the other patrons paid little notice. After all, his attire did not fit the typical mold of high-priced fashion, and his quiet nature blended in with the low hum of conversation. However, the peace in the dining room did not last long. A sudden burst of noise at the entrance disrupted the refined atmosphere. An influencer, famous in certain social media circles, swept into the restaurant with her devices held high, broadcasting live to her sizable online audience. She projected an air of complete self-importance, clearly believing her presence alone should command the staff's undivided attention. Her name was Madison Blake, though her followers worshipped her under a handle that implied lavish living and aspirational lifestyles. She sailed across the polished floors, her designer heels tapping out a staccato that clashed with the ambiance. As she was led to a prime table, meticulously chosen for ideal lighting, Madison exuded entitlement with every gesture. In her mind, everything about the evening needed to serve her personal brand. She wanted the perfect snapshot of the Gilded Fork's interior for her live audience, an image that would highlight her own glamour rather than the elegant decor around her. She greeted staff members with condescension, taking pleasure in name-dropping her follower count whenever someone dared to suggest that even a social media celebrity might need a reservation. From her vantage point, she quickly noticed something that disrupted her carefully curated shot. In the background of her camera feed, a man wearing a denim shirt and jeans could be seen quietly eating his steak. Madison became increasingly flustered, feeling her content was ruined by what she perceived as an unsophisticated diner. She began maneuvering around the table, adjusting her phone angles, huffing in frustration because the same denim-clad figure persisted in her camera's frame no matter where she stood. For a short while, the restaurant's other guests watched this spectacle with amusement. Many recognized the seemingly ordinary man at the corner table, but Madison remained oblivious. Chuck Norris continued his meal without reacting, appearing quietly entertained by the fuss but not intervening in any way. He took discreet sips from his drink, occasionally glancing at the influencer as she prowled for new angles. Madison soon concluded that the only way to salvage her livestream was to eliminate the distraction entirely. She believed that the Gilded Fork, in all its splendor, existed to accommodate her personal brand image. She was convinced that anyone not matching her aesthetic, an aesthetic carefully honed through filters and staged photos, had no business lingering in her background. Determined to remove the problem at its source, she set her phone aside and approached the corner table. Without any tact, she made it clear that she considered the unassuming diner an intrusion on her luxury experience. She wanted him gone from her sight so she could resume recording. Her demeanor practically dripped with the assumption that this older man in denim would apologize for daring to remain seated so close. It never dawned on her that she was addressing a global icon, a martial artist, actor, and pop culture legend who had faced far more formidable opponents than an Instagram star armed with smartphones. As the interaction began, the restaurant seemed to fall silent. Other patrons discreetly nudged each other, whispering about the irony of an influencer who had no idea she was confronting Chuck Norris. The staff also sensed something extraordinary brewing. A hush spread broken only by subtle gasps and the faint sounds of silverware clinking against plates. Madison showed little interest in who the diner might be. Fixated on her own reflection in her phone's camera not long before, she assumed she could simply assert her status as an internet celebrity, wave a brand name handbag, and watch him scramble to appease her demands. She saw him only as an obstacle to a flawless image, an artifact that cheapened the illusion of prestige she planned to show her followers. For a moment, Chuck Norris simply observed her with the calmness of someone who had faced countless adversities and had nothing left to prove. He gave no indication of annoyance, offense, or alarm. Since the very beginning, he had understood that entitlement and superficial fame often led to encounters like this. He had spent decades in the public eye, though typically in the realm of action films and television shows, rather than social media stardom. From the vantage point of other diners, the tension appeared almost comedic. On one side stood a woman who genuinely believed her social media following endowed her with unrivaled power. On the other side sat Chuck Norris, radiating humility yet carrying the weight of legendary status. Madison clearly had no idea that her target had legions of fans that spanned generations, and her brazen attempt at intimidation would soon backfire spectacularly. When Chuck Norris made a subtle movement, it caught Madison off guard. He paused his meal, took a measured glance around the restaurant, and then gazed back at her with a patient expression. Onlookers noted how he seemed to weigh his next move, almost as if considering whether to defuse the situation or allow it to unfold in a more memorable way. Without a direct confrontation, he exuded an aura of self-assured composure that hinted he was more than capable of handling whatever drama might ensue. The restaurant's other patrons watched with anticipation. Some instinctively reached for their phones, sensing an imminent viral moment. The staff, equally curious, held their breath. It was as if time had slowed and every eye in the establishment turned toward the denim-clad icon and the glammed-up influencer. Every second crackled with unspoken tension. Madison, emboldened by her belief that she could squash the situation with a few pointed remarks, seemed entirely convinced that Chuck Norris was just another diner who lacked the sophistication to belong in such a high-end setting. She believed a stern complaint would be enough to force him out, or at least force him to relocate. In her mind, her preference for filming took precedence over his right to enjoy dinner. At some point, she became even more incensed and started referencing her online presence. She made it clear that she was a powerhouse in the digital world, claiming her audience size dwarfed that of any ordinary individual. Her entire strategy was to shame him into compliance by suggesting that she could tarnish his reputation through her social media accounts. Yet the more she fumed, the more perplexed some onlookers became, wondering how on earth she could remain so clueless about the person she was targeting. It was only a matter of time before the tension escalated to a breaking point. Madison's indignation flared when she realized Chuck Norris was not reacting with fear or deference. Instead, he maintained a polite but understated smile, calmly continuing with his meal. His body language implied he was neither intimidated by her nor inclined to meet aggression with aggression. The more he refused to take her meltdown seriously, the more furious she became, determined to spark a dramatic confrontation that would humiliate him in front of the cameras. Around this juncture, whispers traveled among the tables. The name Chuck Norris began passing from table to table like a secret that each diner understood, but knew better than to shout. Many recognized him immediately, recalling the countless jokes and memes about his invincibility and the iconic status he held in pop culture. The tension took on an almost surreal quality, as people wondered how this influencer could remain so oblivious. Madison's frustration caused her to broadcast louder. She believed that making a scene would pressure the staff into action. She wanted the managers to notice her mounting anger and take her side before any potential fallout reached her 2 million followers. A statistic she mentioned repeatedly, although the exact number seemed to increase every time she brandished it. The entire restaurant listened, fascinated as she continued with her dramatic display, describing how her brand deals and sponsorships were paramount, how her video content was non-negotiable, and how a single negative post from her could break any establishment's reputation. Unbeknownst to Madison, Chuck Norris was far from a random older gentleman with a limited bank account or social circle. Though he found her antics quite excessive, he remained polite, quietly refusing to escalate the conflict. He did, however, show a flicker of amusement at her brazen assumption that the presence of an ordinary diner could overshadow her self-perceived grandeur. For Madison, discovering the truth of who she was dealing with would be the beginning of an unforgettable lesson. The onlookers sensed that a revealing moment was mere seconds away. Some diners started filming discreetly, anticipating a viral gem. They suspected this footage would gain traction as soon as the internet discovered that the influencer had ignorantly tried to overpower Chuck Norris by flaunting her online fame. Despite the sense that a pivotal moment approached, no one knew exactly how it would unfold. Madison's sense of entitlement did not wane. If anything, it intensified. She was determined to have the manager evict or relocate Chuck Norris. She even threatened to sink the Gilded Fork's reputation online if they failed to respond to her demands immediately. Staff members, usually trained to handle even the most demanding customers, looked uneasy and uncomfortable. Although they wanted to maintain the restaurant's usual grace, they also recognized who Chuck Norris was and felt reluctant to cause him any trouble. Just as the tension seemed poised to explode, Madison turned her sights on the manager's office. She stomped across the restaurant, high heels striking the polished floor with increasing anger, convinced that a stern directive from management would settle her complaint instantly. By the time she threw open the door, the entire restaurant was watching in near silence. Everyone knew her next step would either satisfy her or trigger an even bigger confrontation, but no one could predict exactly what the manager's reaction would be. At this point, a collective hush drifted over the tables. The staff braced themselves for the influencer's tirade while Chuck Norris calmly set down his utensils, fully prepared for whatever came next. No one in that pristine establishment could have anticipated the sheer magnitude of the backlash that was about to descend upon Madison's once glittering social media empire. The manager of the Gilded Fork was known for his poise under pressure, but nothing had prepared him for the scene that charged into his office that night. When Madison Blake appeared, cheeks flushed and eyes blazing, the manager momentarily froze at the sight of a furious social media influencer who projected complete conviction in her power to destroy reputations with a single post. She demanded swift action against the denim-clad stranger, causing her unimaginable grief. However, as her complaints spilled forth, the manager recognized the name that customers had been whispering throughout the evening. Realizing that the so-called old man in denim was, in fact, Chuck Norris, the manager felt his perspective shift in an instant. Still, he listened patiently, grappling with how to respond to someone who seemed so out of touch with what was really happening in the dining room. Madison rattled off her credentials, her enormous follower count, her partnership deals, her ability to cancel anyone at will, apparently convinced that even the mention of these facts would compel the restaurant to follow her every directive. The manager weighed the situation carefully. On one hand, the Gilded Fork had a reputation for serving affluent clientele and prided itself on avoiding messy conflicts. On the other hand, it was unthinkable to disrespect Chuck Norris, a figure revered by patrons and staff alike. Yet, from a purely business perspective, the manager understood that appeasing Madison could potentially shield them from negative online reviews. But it would also compromise the restaurant's values. With all eyes in the establishment waiting expectantly, the manager made a decision. He walked out of his office with Madison trailing behind him, her phone camera still capturing every second of the showdown. The hush among the patrons grew deeper as the manager approached Chuck Norris's table. Everyone noticed the transformation in the manager's demeanor. He appeared resolute and undeterred by the influence of social media clout, a refreshing change of pace in a world where likes and shares often dictated public perception. A wave of silence rippled across the dining room as Madison waited for the manager to carry out her demand. She watched with unwavering certainty, expecting him to force Chuck Norris to move or leave entirely. In her mind, there was no alternative. Her personal brand and the perfect shot depended on it. Yet that moment of truth revealed a stark contrast between Madison's self-aggrandizing illusions and the restaurant's core principles. The manager, conscious of the dignity Chuck Norris had maintained throughout Madison's tirade, refused to bar or relocate him. Instead, the manager calmly explained that the restaurant's values included respect for all guests, regardless of social status or follower count. Madison's expression morphed from haughtiness to pure disbelief. She seemed paralyzed, torn between anger and a dawning realization that her commands might not be heeded. Her phone, still streaming live, captured every second of this unexpected twist. Fans watching her feed saw the manager stand by Chuck Norris, and comments began pouring into Madison's livestream at breakneck speed. Although she continued to hold her phone in front of her, the confidence behind her eyes started to flicker. She saw an immediate shift in her audience's reactions. Instead of cheering on their favorite influencer, they mocked her ignorance of Chuck Norris's legendary status and her arrogant assumptions about how easily she could manipulate the staff. Madison's meltdown escalated as she realized she was losing control of the narrative. She threatened to unleash negative reviews, to tarnish the restaurant's online image, and to mobilize her followers into a digital frenzy. She implied that the manager was dooming the Gilded Fork to catastrophic cancellation. For a split second, staff members exchanged uncertain glances, and the other guests wondered if the manager might cave to the pressure. However, he stood firm, and so did Chuck Norris. Neither seemed willing to disrupt their principles to appease a tirade fueled by vanity. As the tension rose, a new element began to shape the unfolding drama. Madison's own social media feed overflowed with comments challenging her behavior. Detractors and onlookers began resharing her livestream in real time, ridiculing her attitude and praising Chuck Norris for his calm poise. This sudden shift unsettled Madison more than any official rebuke could have. She recognized, possibly for the first time, that the platform she wielded as a weapon had turned on her. The brand deals she flaunted and the illusions of unstoppable online power were slipping from her grip. Determined to uphold the restaurant's atmosphere, the manager delivered a clear request. Madison should leave if she persisted in disturbing other diners. Her threats about exposing the Gilded Fork on social media no longer held weight. In fact, many of the manager's employees were already capturing the entire ordeal on their personal devices, and the story was certain to become public in one way or another. This final statement struck Madison like a lightning bolt. For the first time, she looked genuinely flustered. Her carefully curated image of invincibility began to show visible cracks. Her phone wavered in her hand. She realized she was broadcasting a scene in which she no longer looked like a misunderstood star, but rather a cautionary tale of arrogance gone awry. She glared furiously around the room, scanning each face for sympathy or support, but only found polite smiles and raised eyebrows. Even the few onlookers who initially might have been impressed by her glamour now viewed her with disdain or pity. She understood that leaving quietly was her only option, but her pride demanded some final display of righteous indignation. With her streaming audience still tuning in, Madison offered her parting shot. Though no direct words were spoken within earshot, the fury in her face made it clear she intended to broadcast her supposed victimhood to the world. She grabbed her designer purse, slammed her phone onto the table long enough to gather her belongings, then pivoted and strutted toward the front doors. To observers, the silence that followed her departure felt electric. Nobody celebrated too openly in that moment, but relief and triumph were palpable. Madison's forced exit signaled that decorum and respect had prevailed over shallow displays of clout. The staff exhaled a collective sigh of relief. Other diners returned to their conversations, and Chuck Norris resumed his quiet meal. In the aftermath of this exodus, waiters whispered to each other about how surreal the entire encounter had been. Some replayed the footage on their phones, discovering that the event was already circulating widely online. Restaurant patrons close to the drama texted clips to friends and family, building the foundation for what would become a viral sensation by morning. The subsequent hours saw a whirlwind of activity on various social platforms. Madison's livestream, saved and re-uploaded by countless watchers, rapidly spread across the internet under mocking headlines. Memes of her meltdown appeared almost instantly, some combining her exaggerated expressions with Chuck Norris's cool composure. Even accounts typically friendly to influencers questioned her actions. Brands that had once eagerly associated themselves with Madison's glamorous image issued statements distancing themselves from her behavior. A few of these companies even hinted that they were terminating her sponsored deals, citing her unprofessional and rude conduct as incompatible with their values. Madison was left scrambling to respond in a manner that would salvage her image, though every new attempt only seemed to highlight her lack of genuine remorse. At the same time, Chuck Norris found himself the recipient of renewed admiration from fans both old and new. People praised him for calmly maintaining his dignity in the face of an unrelenting public confrontation. For a man who never went out seeking online fame, he became the centerpiece of yet another wave of internet adoration. As the evening progressed and the social media storm raged beyond the restaurant's walls, Chuck Norris finished his meal. Aware of the fuss the confrontation generated, but uninterested in fueling the drama, he left a generous tip and made his way toward the exit. The staff thanked him profusely for his courtesy, and a few diners offered him respectful nods or whispered words of admiration. In a small, tasteful gesture that demonstrated his character, Chuck Norris signed the guest book at the Gilded Fork with a brief quote, reflecting his belief that true respect does not discriminate based on superficial criteria like clothes or social media numbers. His inscription, written in neat handwriting, included a reminder that power should be measured by compassion and the ability to maintain composure in challenging circumstances rather than by the size of one's audience. In the days that followed, Madison Blake struggled to repair her tarnished reputation. She posted carefully edited videos framing the night's events as an overreaction by others. She insisted she had been singled out by so-called Chuck Norris fans, who refused to recognize modern social media influencer culture. However, her attempts landed on unreceptive ears. Much of her audience, both loyal followers and casual viewers, had already seen the raw footage from the livestream where her sense of entitlement and disrespect were plain to see. One by one, deals she had celebrated as evidence of her success dissolved. Several major brands quietly removed her endorsements from their feeds, removing Madison's face from campaigns that once featured her prominently. Small businesses she had partnered with distanced themselves as well, worried that any association with her meltdown would tarnish their own reputations. She was left with a fraction of her former income and an audience that had split into two camps: those who still supported her unconditionally, and a much larger group that mocked her relentlessly. Desperate to remain relevant, Madison considered a last-ditch effort to craft a public apology directed at Chuck Norris. She believed that if she appeared contrite and recognized his status as an American pop culture icon, she might persuade the public to forgive her. Yet her pride interfered each time she tried drafting an apology post. She found it difficult to accept that the internet stardom she had banked on could be undone so quickly by a single encounter. Finally, she recorded and uploaded a lengthy video in which she attempted to express regret. However, the apology felt hollow and half-hearted, more focused on her own losses than on any genuine wrongdoing. She mentioned how the stress of living under constant public scrutiny led her to lash out, how the pressures of maintaining a social media persona can be overwhelming. Her words still reeked of self-pity, and she appeared insincere when mentioning respect toward Chuck Norris. Viewers saw through her veneer. The video did little to shift the negative momentum. Comment sections filled with criticisms, pointing out that humility and respect were earned through sincere actions, not staged confessions. Some fans implored her to step away from social media for a while and reflect on her behavior, but it was unclear whether she would heed their advice. Meanwhile, the Gilded Fork witnessed an unexpected upswing in its fortunes. Clips of the incident, showcasing how gracefully the restaurant managed the situation, went viral, inspiring many to visit the upscale eatery to experience the environment firsthand. Individuals from across the country booked reservations well in advance, seeking to dine at the very tables where the confrontation had taken place. The restaurant received thousands of supportive comments and 5-star reviews, praising the staff's professional handling of an out-of-control customer. For the restaurant manager, the result was a whirlwind of publicity. Interviews poured in from local and national news outlets, each wanting details of how it felt to mediate a dispute between one of the internet's most notorious influencers and an enduring action movie legend. Keeping with the same dignified approach he exhibited that night, the manager offered balanced remarks, praising Chuck Norris for being a gracious guest and refraining from harsh criticism of Madison, beyond pointing out the importance of basic respect. Unconcerned with the surge in his own social media following, Chuck Norris maintained his usual private routine in the aftermath. Still, fans and journalists clamored for his perspective. Some invited him to speak publicly about the confrontation or to appear on talk shows. He politely declined most requests, citing the need to focus on family, fitness, and charitable activities. Despite his refusal to engage in widespread interviews, the impact of this event continued to solidify his status as a figure revered not just for action roles and martial arts expertise, but also for quietly upholding values of humility and kindness. The episode at the Gilded Fork simply reinforced the long-standing notion that Chuck Norris's legendary toughness extended beyond physical feats. It also encompassed a steadfast moral compass. In the broader online community, discussions raged about the nature of influence and whether social media fame truly conferred any real power if it was built on superficial foundations. Madison's downfall became a prime example of how quickly an audience can turn on an influencer who disrespects a beloved figure and a high-end establishment without provocation. Aspiring content creators exchanged cautionary tales, warning each other against letting the pursuit of followers and lucrative sponsorships eclipse basic human decency. Memes capturing Madison's facial expressions and Chuck Norris's poised reaction flew across Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Users remarked that no matter how large one's platform might be, genuine character triumphs in the end. Perhaps the most touching reminder of everything that took place remained in the Gilded Forks guestbook. The manager chose to display the page Chuck Norris signed in a small glass case near the restaurant entrance. Patrons entering the lobby could read his words and reflect on their meaning before stepping into the refined dining area. Each day, visitors paused by the case, nodding thoughtfully at the handwritten lines. The staff kept the restaurant's daily operations smooth and elegant, just as they always had. Yet now, a subtle energy lingered in the air, an energy that suggested something remarkable had transpired within those walls, reminding everyone that no amount of social media swagger could match the quiet power of respect, humility, and unwavering self-assurance. In the end, Madison Blake's ill-conceived attack on a man in denim at an upscale restaurant turned into her greatest regret. The meltdown she hoped would catapult her into viral glory instead led to a tarnished reputation, lost sponsorships, and widespread mockery. Meanwhile, Chuck Norris went on with his life, unaffected by the vacillations of internet notoriety. By doing so, he cemented the principle that true influence arises from the lives one touches with kindness and steadfast character, rather than from the inflated numbers scrolling across a social media feed. Such was the legacy of that fateful night at the Gilded Fork, where arrogance met humility and discovered, much to its surprise, that no amount of followers could ever surpass the quiet power of genuine respect.